questions during Steve's chat. There's a bottom piece where it says chat, and you can just type in your questions there. And at the end, we'll leave a few minutes where Steve will be able to answer those questions, and if I can help answer any of them as well. So just type that in at the bottom, and we'll get to those at the end. So here's Steve.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and let me know if it's working here. So let me go to share screen. Can you guys see my screen right now?
Not yet.
All right, I think it's coming up. Let's see. Oh, I gotta maybe hit share screen.
Oh, now it's working. Yep.
All right, so everyone can see what I see, the presentation here?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess I'll get started now. So I'm kind of honored to be the first teacher to be doing this webinar series. It's the Teach Earth webinar #1 I'm putting up here. I teach out in Santa Monica at a school in California, Santa Monica, California, called Crossroads School for Arts and Sciences. It's my 30th year of teaching, and I'm a big fan of Earthwatch, so I try to volunteer as much as possible for them now that I've been on 2 expeditions. So let's get started with this presentation right here. Hold on one second. Let me get this back on. All right, here we go. All right, so welcome to the webinar. I titled this one, Bringing the Teach Earth Fellowship Experience into the Classroom. As was mentioned, I've been on 2 expeditions so far for Earthwatch, the first one in 2015, the second one in 2016, and those were the Teach Earth Fellowship for Climate Change at the Arctic's Edge that I went to. That was a wonderful program. If any of you are interested in going there, I highly recommend it. This was our team, so shout out if any of you guys are watching right now. There's our picture. I'm the only male that was on this team, so it's the one that in that bug suit there. The second expedition I went on was last summer for Project Kindle, and this is what the webinar is going to be about, is what we learned in the Restoring Meadows in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and how I'm going to incorporate that into my classroom. This is part of the team members. I don't know if anyone knows Keegan, but Keegan's one of the guys from Earthwatch. He's in this picture too. He was on the expedition, and the rest of the team members are right over here. Oh, actually they were cows, but they were also at the Meadows. This project was in a partnership that Earthwatch has with an organization called Circle, which is the South Yuba River Citizens League, who does science in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The principal lead researcher is Rachel Hutchinson. She's a river science director and water resource expert. Betsy Harbert was her lead assistant, who's a plant biologist. And then we had Carl Roning, who was a river monitoring coordinator. He's a hydrologist who was studying the river and the water aspects of the Meadows. So for this program, the Circle was trying to figure out, as many of you know, if you're not from California, I'm sure you've all heard we've been in a huge drought, which is kind of interesting because we just had the hugest winter and the biggest snowfall in many, many years. So when I was on the project, there wasn't a single bit of snow anywhere in the Sierras, but we were basically trying to figure out, Circle's trying to figure out for the state of California if it's worth restoring meadows and spending millions of dollars, because meadow plants are believed to store groundwater better than pine forest and other vegetation that's up in the Sierra Mountains, and many of the meadows are degraded due to years of grazing with animals. Just lack from the drought is destroying some of the groundwater levels. So what I want to do is that in my class, what I would do is I'd present the Circle data first. So what I'm going to present to you today is a whole long-term project that I'm planning on doing. I didn't do it this year because I'm just getting everything together for it, but I'm planning on doing this next year. The things that we studied in Circle were, we looked at the plant communities, and we would do these little transects that were like 12 inches by 12 inch, where we'd cut everything out and they would collect all the species and send them to a lab for analysis to figure out what's going on. This shows pictures of one of the meadows taken from the air. All those yellow dots are places where we did transects, where we did vegetation transects. Now, of course, one Earthwatch team didn't do all those transects. They would have different Earthwatch teams coming back and forth and other volunteer teams that would help. So I'm not sure exactly which transects we did, but we were actually working in 3 different meadows up in the Sierras. We found that there was 6 sub-communities inside the meadows that had indicator species. So if you see the plant community names, those are the different species there. So what I was interested in, it was obvious from being up there that the different plant communities had different soil moisture contents. And that's what my big experiment that we're going to be doing, that I'll explain to you in a little bit, has to do with figuring out what kind of moisture conditions in the soil lead to these different plant communities, and how is the drought affecting these plant communities in the meadows. So this is their data from Circle I'm showing you right now. You can see that there was 3 meadows, the Upper Loney, the Loney, and the Deer Meadow, which they have, some of them are starting to be restored already. Some of them are very degraded. This is a map showing in one of the meadows the different communities that were on the previous page where they were located. We looked at groundwater levels is another thing we were checking. So to do groundwater levels, we had to pound these 6-foot, they're called piezometers, into the ground that detect groundwater level. And that's at the end of pounding it in, but you can see the ladder where people had to step on the ladder and hit the very top. That's how tall these things were that we had to shove into the ground in these meadows. This is the location of all the different groundwater monitoring that they're doing. The data is interesting that they sent us. One of the things I love about Earthwatch projects is that you get all this data that you can use for your classroom. So I try to incorporate it as best as I can. If you look at the piezometer data, it'll show how deep the groundwater was at different locations. But if you notice by month, in the summer months, the water gets very, very deep. It gets deeper and deeper where the groundwater is. But in May, some of the groundwater was above water because that's how meadows work. There was a lot of snowmelt and flow, but that disappears in the summer. This summer, I would assume, is going to be a completely different picture. We checked soil moisture levels, so we were trying to correlate with the communities. What was the soil moisture at this? You can see this is a particular area that looks kind of dry. Some parts of the meadow were very muddy and very wet, depending on the elevation and how far down into the ground it went. This is a thing that's used to record the soil moisture. It's basically, it sends an electric current through 2 electrodes, and depending on how much water it is, it can measure the resistivity, and they can analyze how much soil is in the water. So that's one of the things that I purchased this year from my school. We purchased a couple of these soil monitors so we could do the experiment that I'm going to be explaining to you. We were also looking at greenhouse gas emissions, because one of the things that the state of California is worried about, and the U.S. Geological Survey and Fish and Wildlife and all these places, they're not sure if you restore meadows, if it's a good idea in terms of greenhouse gas, because as you can see from this chart, 20% of greenhouse emissions comes from agriculture and land, and from meadows, there's a lot of detrivores. And so when the plants die, they emit methane, and there's a lot of methane emission there. So one of the things we were looking at, even though the plants through photosynthesis absorb carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide gets taken out of the atmosphere, there's also a lot of methane release. So one of the things that I love about Earthwatch is it's not a dogmatic program. All the researchers are out there trying to really figure out what is going on, because we don't really know what's going on with global warming. We're really trying to get the data that hopefully will get continued support for the government to give us that support so we can get that data going. But they were very concerned about, if we do restore the meadows, maybe that's going to make it worse for global warming instead of better. But the idea is that meadow plants store soil moisture better. So we know that the state of California wants to be able to store the moisture. This is somebody collecting the greenhouse gas samples. So we would collect it we would put like a plastic device on top of the ground and bury it into the ground, and then take gas samples that would be sent to a laboratory. The other thing, healthy meadows have rivers that run through them, or little channels of water. And we wanted to measure a good way to figure out how much water is actually being absorbed into the ground that's going, not just running off into lakes or seas or anything like that, is to measure water inflow and outflow. So one of the things we were measuring was how much water was flowing into the river from the top, the highest elevation part of the meadow, and how much was flowing out at the bottom elevation of the meadow. And you can see here, this is one of the workers from Circle. He has a flow meter there, but he's also measuring that tells you the flow rate, but he's measuring the width of the river and the depth. So if you know the width and the depth and the flow rate, you can get an estimate of how much water is flowing in and out of the rivers and out of the meadows. So here's where we get to how I'm going to incorporate this in my class. So I had the idea that one of the things that I thought was interesting is that we had those 6 different plant communities there. And I thought this would be a good way to introduce plant ecology to my students. I teach biology, I also teach chemistry and physics in high school here. But in my bio class, we're going to be doing this experiment where we're going to be looking at trying to figure out what factors, what type of soil moisture content affects the different communities. So to give some background, anytime we do a lab, or I do lab, I always want to make sure I give a little bit of pre-instruction. So this is all due to global warming that we're doing this study, because it's a very big concern in California that we need to retain the groundwater and not let it run off, especially this year when we got that huge snow melt or snow pack that's over 4 times the past 4 years. So I have a bunch of data that I'll just run through here, but it shows kind of like the drought. This is in last summer. Now the drought is almost gone in a lot of these places in California because of this year. But this shows how bad the drought got starting in January 2012. The darker colors are the ones that are the more severe drought areas. The Sierras are kind of up in this area where it's red and brown over here, where we were. This was interesting. I thought this little chart here, I would be showing a bunch of charts like this to my students where it shows, well, what does this have to do with us? Who cares if there's a drought? It shows here that all of California is one of the biggest agricultural producers of fruits and vegetables, and it shows how the prices have increased due to the drought because they get less of a yield and a crop yield, so that affects us. This I thought was interesting because it's the most recent data. This is from May 9th, 2017. This is a live website from the US Forest Service, I believe is what it was from. And you can see over here that it shows you the dark areas are where you have, it's what percent of California has severe drought. If you look over in 2016, 21.04% of California was under the severest drought. And since we've had our huge winter here, you can see that's gone down to 0 now in California. There's 0% of California actually is in that very, very severe category. So I thought one winter really made a huge difference, and it's kind of shocking to me that what I saw last year, if I go back this summer, which I won't be, but if I did, I'm sure it would look completely different. Let's get on to the next slide here. And it's not responding. So hold on, give me a second here. Sorry about this, hold on, we've got a technical difficulty. All right, let me try to get this back up and started. Sorry about this. Okay, let's try to see if this is working. Figures, you try to do a presentation and all of a sudden the technology dies on you. Let me try to get this back up and started here.
And there are a few people that have popped on over the past 10 minutes or so. So just a note to you all, as see this back up, there's a chat box at the bottom. So if you do have a question, feel free to just write them in the chat box. We're going to take some time at the end to go over those questions. And also the whole video is recorded. So for the first few minutes that you missed, you can have access afterwards to the full recording.
Okay, I think I'm back online here. So let me run through these slides I just showed about the drought over here. All right, is it back working for you guys?
Looks good.
All right, here we go. So, of course, part of the whole reason why we're doing this study and a lot of the Earthwatch expeditions is because of global warming. So, just that would be part of the lesson planning for my students. We would talk about global warming and greenhouse gases. So, I'm sure that since you're teachers, most people are aware that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, but they're not aware that methane is a huge greenhouse gas. In fact, it's way more powerful than carbon dioxide, as this slide shows right over here. It's 28 times more powerful. And that was the big thing they were worried about, is that the meadows might be releasing a lot more methane than it's soaking in carbon dioxide. So that was one of the goals of the research, that they haven't got that data back yet. That's going to take years to get all that data together. Part of this unit, I'd be teaching about plant biology. So I'd give them basic parts of a plant and what the functions are, how leaves work, what the meadows had lots of monocots versus dicots. There were sedges and rushes, which are monocots. There was dicots, which are flowers. So I'd teach my students through this lab about that. Photosynthesis, so they understand that plants take in carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, release oxygen. And then I would show them lots of pictures of flowers, which I'm not going to show you guys because it would take too long, but this is what the meadow looked like. You can see there's monocots around here. There's some dicots over here with flowers on it. And we would talk about meadow ecology. So I'd use this as, this is like, I'm planning on this being a whole long unit, at least a month, where I'm going through this while we're doing the experiment. We're going to also be learning all these lessons during the experimental project period. So we would talk about nitrogen cycle, why that's important. We'd talk about soil type and how that affects vegetation, different types of biomes, and the different layers of soil. In meadows, we have a huge layer of organic material in meadows due to all the decaying plants and the detrivores that are up there. Of course, we would talk about the water cycle, because that's what this whole project is all about, is how do we retain that precipitation, the snowpack, how is California going to help retain that water when we get it? And it's believed that meadows are one of the best ways to do it. So if anybody's interested later, there's websites that I would refer my students to, and I was going to show you those websites, but I'm afraid to get out of them now that we had technical difficulties. I think I should just, maybe at the end, I'll show you these websites that I use to have my students do research with. By the way, the lab I'm going to do, I teach ninth graders, but it's designed for high school level, but you can easily modify what I'm about to show you guys for middle school as well, and even probably elementary school, I would imagine too. So for the project design, it's a big thing probably now in all the US, I would imagine. We're all learning about engineering design and inquiry-based learning and the NGSS methods. So we try at our school now, we're trying to really convert all of our labs to inquiry-based learning, where we have students design the labs. What I found with that is that it's great to have students design their own labs and everything, but if we have 20 different students or 30 different students designing 30 different labs, and then as a teacher you have to grade all those labs, it's not the best way, most efficient way to be a teacher. So what I've been trying to do is like figure out ways where I already kind of have an idea of what I want the students to do for the procedure for the investigation or the lab, but I want them to come up with those ideas themselves. So it's like free questioning, and I'll be explaining more of that in a little bit about how I get my students to come up with things. So we would talk about things like, the main thing we'd say, what are some of the factors that are affecting the meadows and the plants? What might be, have students brainstorm on that to see what they think. And eventually we get to the point, well, the main thing is we want to study drought. So what do we need to do to study how the drought's affecting the plant species that are growing in these meadows and the health of these meadows? So we would talk about, well, what would be an experimental variable? What do we want to test? And eventually I would hope that they would get to the fact that we want to test the soil moisture. That would be our experimental variable. The explanatory variable, we're going to plant seeds that are from the meadow plants, and we're going to plant all the different 6 communities that we saw there. We're going to take the 2 main plants from those communities and have different groups growing those with different levels of soil moisture. That's my idea, that's my plan, but I want them to come up with it. So I'm pretty good at getting them to do that. The explanatory variable then would be how many plants grow at the different levels of moisture, soil moisture. Controlled variables, we talk about the need to control variables, like we want to control the sunlight, we want to control the amount of soil, things like that. specific treatments, which I'll explain to you in a little bit more. I get students to come up with ideas about what kind of treatments do we want to do, how do we want to proceed this. And I would let them pretty much come up with a procedure. But again, I would be very leading in my questions to get them to come up with what I want them to come up. So for asking, the main thing that we're going to be asking is why are there 6 distinct vegetation subcommunities found in the Sierra Meadows study? Why did we see that? Why did we find that? What environmental factors may be affecting those? How might California's drought affect the meadow plant species? How does soil moisture content? And there's a bunch of really good websites from the government, different agencies that monitor these things. So there's another web link here I don't want to show you right now, but maybe at the end, that I would have my students research for this. Then we would create, discuss, and reflect would be part of the experimentation process. So this is part of the inquiry-based learning. So we would do experiments, we do data collection, we're gonna do seed germination, soil moisture monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. And for high school, I wanna try to incorporate more statistics. I feel like we have a lack of statistics at my school at least. And we do a lot of experiments, but we don't know how to teach students whether the data is significant or not. So I don't want to get into how to do a chi-square test, but I'm planning on having my students actually do a chi-square test to test if there is a difference in the different plant germinations at different soil moisture levels. The materials that I'm planning on using for this lab, I'm planning on growing the plants in plastic egg cartons. We're going to use potting soil, trowels, tap water, grow light systems, soil moisture probes, metric rulers, plant seeds. So it kind of works out perfect. There's 6 plant communities and there's 2 main species that are the indicator species for those communities. So 6 times 2 is 12. So if you use an egg carton with 12 things, you can test all the different communities and all the different plants. My idea that I hope the students would also come up with is that I want to have 6 different groups. I'll explain that in a little bit more, but we would put inside the egg cartons, I measured how much soil they can hold. Each egg thing can hold about 125 milliliters of soil. So we would fill them all with 125 milliliters of soil with our trowel. And we would grow it under grow light system because we want to control the light. And so this is one of the things that I have yet to purchase from my school and convince them to buy. If not, we would have to do it outdoors. But I think to control the amount of sunlight, it'd be better to have a system like this. And they are planning on purchasing it for me next year. These are the soil moisture sensors that we have. We use Vernier systems here. And so that hooks into a Vernier probe system, and it can measure the soil moisture. It's almost exactly what we used up in the place. And then of course, we're gonna get seeds for these 12 different plant species. So like in the first plant community, there's Carex nebrasensis, which I think is a sedge, and Epilobium halvianum. Don't know how to pronounce all these names. But you can see that there's 6 different communities, and we're gonna test all those communities, because what I noticed when I was there is that some of these grow in really wet areas, some of these grow in really dry areas. And that's what we're trying to figure out, is what plants are gonna grow and be successful if we have a drought, or what plants are better at growing at different soil moisture conditions. So I have over here the desired procedure. This is what I'm hoping the students will come up with, because I want them to actually participate in the design for this. But I'm planning on dividing my students into a minimum of 6 groups. Those 6 groups each one would be studying one of the 6 plant subcommunities. So I put, for example, one will be given, they'll be in charge of the Danthonia california plant and the Trifolium longipes plant community. We would give all the materials to the students, have them put 125 milliliters of potting soil into the 12 eggs. And then the idea is that they're gonna test, so each group of students will test the 2 main plant indicator plant species from that particular subcommunity. So they will test it at different levels, and the control would be using 0 milliliters of water. So we'd actually have one row of the egg carton. We'd have the 2 columns, would be one for each plant, and we would have 6 different treatments. We'd have 0 milliliters of water added, 25 milliliters of water added. It goes up by 25 milliliters all the way up to 125 milliliters of water mixed in with 125 milliliters of soil. And the reason why we want to go all the way up to there, because there was actually some of the plant communities were underwater due to the fact that they were below the ground level area. So we do want to have one treatment that's almost, because there was plants that were growing that only grow in that conditions underwater. So what I'd have the students do the initial soil moisture probe before we plant seeds. They would get an exact reading on all these different things about what the different, once we make the mixtures, what is the actual soil moisture percentage in the soil. Then we would have the students record the data and then plant the seeds. And I'm going to show you the data table in a second here. And the idea is that I don't know how long this is going to take because I don't know how long it takes to germinate, but I'm thinking this is going to be a month to maybe 4 to 6 week long project where we're going to be monitoring every day in class for a few minutes. They'll monitor they'll check their egg cartons out and see what's happening. And they'll record data. So like number of seedlings that have germinated, the max height of the seedlings, soil moisture content. And we're going to constantly monitor the soil moisture. So that way, due to evaporation, it's going to go down, but we'll add water to try to keep it at a constant level throughout the whole entire experiment. And part of the challenge will be to figure out how much water do you add if you lost like 5% of your soil moisture to get it back up to where it needs to be. So for data, oh, don't tell me it's stuck again. Come on. Sorry, but oh man, this thing's being touchy. Of course, it didn't do this when I was testing it. So let me refresh this. Come on. All right, so we were at project design here. Oops. Let me move it fast forward to where we were. All right, so we have a materials list. Go through all these again. I apologize for the technical difficulties. I swear I ran this thing at least 30 times today and had no difficulties with it. All right, so there's our procedure. All right, I wanted to show you the data table that this is just something that I thought students might come up with, but basically we're going to have 2 different plant species. So we would have 2 different sections for the 2 different plant species, the group members. They would, the start date would go in the corner up here for the first time. When we add water, we're adding 0, 25. So notice that we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So every time they go and check, they're going to have to put a date, and that'll count for the 6 different rows of plants with the 2 species for all 12 plants. Water added, sometimes it might be none if the soil moisture level seems to be where we want it to be, because we want to keep it consistent throughout the whole entire experiment. But otherwise, if they do add water, they'll keep track of adding the water. They'll look for seedlings to see how many have germinated. They'll look at the max height of the seedlings once they start germinating, and we'll constantly monitor the soil moisture, again, just to make sure that we keep it consistent. So that's how the experiment's going to go. Some of the challenges that I've had in doing this experiment is getting a presentation to work without any blips, obviously. No, but, I was wanting to do this experiment this year because I came up with the plan after I went on the expedition last summer, but it took a long time for Earthwatch to get all their data, or for the Circle people to get all the data to Earthwatch. And so we never got our data until almost January. So we cover ecology and stuff like that in the first semester at my school. So I was planning on doing this as part of the ecology unit. And it just got to be where it was too late to do it this year. And other things are time management. How do you incorporate a long-term project into your class without losing a lot of other time for other things you want to do with your class? So that's why I try to cover a lot of content and background information along with the experiment. For schools, I'm in a private school that has a fairly large budget, but I'm sure that other schools, like equipment needs, you might not be able to afford to get like a grow light system or soil moisture probes, but you can still probably do a similar experiment outdoors. The biggest problem I had is, where do you get the seeds from the actual species? And interestingly enough, on Earth Day, I was asked by Earthwatch to attend a booth at the Los Angeles Zoo to promote Earthwatch's programs with another woman who's also a big supporter of Earthwatch. And one of the other booths there was this booth about California native meadow plants. And so I went and spoke to them, and I said, I've been having, all I could find on the internet is companies that sell these seeds at 150 pounds at a time, which is like way more seeds than we need. So it turns out that this organization just happened to be at the LAZ when I was there for Earthwatch, and they said, yeah, they could definitely provide all the seeds. So I'm going to be getting the seeds from them eventually. I'd have to contact them and work all that out. And really, that's the end of the presentation as far as I have it right now. So thanks for joining us. We are going to have questions. If anyone wants me to go back and show anything back in the presentation, I can. Thanks, Earthwatch, for letting me do this. And does anyone have any questions?
So, as I mentioned earlier, if you do have any questions, we'll give you a minute or two to type them into the chat box and go from there. It looks like Bruce is typing, so one moment here.
Mm-hmm.
So Bruce asked you, well, first he said great presentation, and then he asked you if you have any ideas about connecting the work in Canada with the work in California.
I do. I personally think that climate change is probably the biggest environmental issue of our time. I think we have a president who thinks otherwise now, unfortunately. But I do incorporate in my classroom, I do incorporate stuff that we learned in up in the Arctic. We were actually at the Hudson Bay in Churchill, which is the top of Manitoba in the very northern eastern part of Canada. And the projects were similar because one of the biggest problems up in the Arctic, which is where climate change is 3 times more devastating in the in the polar regions, partially because the permafrost is melting up in the Arctic. And when the permafrost melts, it's the biggest sink of methane gas because there's so much similar types of organic matter that's decomposing up in those areas. So I would tie in the 2 projects in terms of in showing how we got to be careful with methane. Is a very powerful greenhouse gas, more powerful than carbon dioxide is, and there's always that similar balance. Like if the permafrost melts and it releases all this methane, some people say, well, then more plants can start growing inside that area up in Canada, and maybe that would be a bigger carbon dioxide sink through photosynthesis. But at the same time, when it melts, there's all this methane, and that's why right now they're discovering that climate change is so much worse. And also you get all the reflection of the heat back off of the ice in the winter, and it reflects back with the greenhouse gases. So you get this kind of a really super greenhouse effect in the Arctic. So I'm definitely do that. I always show a movie called Chasing Ice. That's really a well-known movie that's about how the ice glaciers are melting all throughout the U.S. So we saw that when I saw that for the first time when I was up in the Arctic, and now I show it every year in my class. And we talk about climate change and how I find in my classroom the students, until they see this movie that's called Chasing Ice, every single one of them, I asked them to do a reflection exercise afterward, and every single one of them said that they didn't realize that this is a problem now. They all think it's a problem for the future. And I think it's really important that our students know this is a problem that we have to deal with now, especially with the political climate we have right now. Climate, funny word, but we definitely have to make sure that students are aware that this is their generation. They're the ones who are going to have to be stuck doing something about this. And so I think it's important for all teachers that teach science courses or even non-science courses to mention what's happening with the environment and the cause. It's human cause, and humans got to deal with it. All right.
Great. And we have a few more questions that have come in, Steve. This one I think you'll be able to touch on nicely based on where your school is located. But Abraham asked, he says he works at an after-school center near downtown Los Angeles, which is highly urban. How do you modify this project to reflect this type of environment and make the connections discussed?
You mean like teaching lower income urban students, I'm assuming, or?
Yeah. So Abraham, to clarify, Steve is teaching in Los Angeles, but yes, I think kind of the different demographic of students. He said yes, at-risk students.
Yeah, so at my school, since our school is very expensive, it costs like $39,000 a year to go here. But the guy who started the school wanted to make sure that we weren't just an elitist school. So we actually have our own busing program, and we have a financial aid program. We give out think something like $18 million worth of financial aid to bring kids from the inner city to our school. They have to apply for it. They go through a program, and there's parents that anonymously pay for kids from the inner city to come to our school. And there's definitely a difference in awareness. I think still, even in Los Angeles, in the downtown area, like there's, I'm sure you're aware that they're trying to rebuild the LA River out in the Pasadena area, which is out by there and stuff like that. So I think a lot of this could apply to like what happens when you have damage to the local plant species. How does that affect or enhance global warming? What other problems does it cause? We can talk about, there's a lot of movement in Los Angeles to try to get local farming and carbon footprints and things like that. So I think there's lots of opportunity even to take a project like this and bring it back to the students and show them a little bit about areas that maybe they're not going to ever have the opportunity to go to the Sierras or go to the Arctic themselves. But to get them to see what's happening over there, and then to see how they can maybe take that into their own community, see what is happening in their life that's affecting global warming. The EPA, I don't know if they still have it, because from what I understand is that a lot of the website of the EPA has been taken down now by the government, but the EPA used to have a wonderful carbon footprint program where you type in like all the different activities that you do, you kind of estimate what you do, how far you drive, how far you go to school, do you walk, do you ride a bike, and it gives you your carbon footprint, and it tells you what you can do to reduce your carbon footprint or to offset it. So it's a goal of mine always to get students interested in and understand the concern for global warming, and hopefully even with kids that come from lower income areas or urbanized areas, even to see that their lives and the choices they make in their lives, what food they eat, where they get their food, where the food comes from, how agriculture, learning that California is one of the biggest providers of food throughout the United States. How does this affect that? I think is a good way to approach that. But I think it's going to take a lot of creative minds to be able to reach everyone in all the different urban areas and rural areas and everywhere else that we have all these different economic structures and things like that. So yeah, I think it is a challenge, but I think it's still possible.
Thank you. And it looks like last question here from Jill. She says, since 125 milliliters of soil will dry out really quickly, especially over the weekend, have you considered using a wicking system to keep your plants moist?
Yeah, so that's so one of the things about, they asked me to do this webinar and I haven't actually done the experiment yet. So because I don't have all the equipment yet, I was just estimating based on, it might not work out that we're using those egg cartons. So maybe one of the things in inquiry-based design is that you do your experiment and if it doesn't work, that's okay, because you can learn from your failures, and then the following year we can say maybe it was too small. I would probably test this stuff myself first and see is 125 milliliters of soil enough. But the idea of monitoring the soil with the soil moisture every time is that we will be adding water, and maybe we can actually figure out, okay, if we see like on one Friday we take a measurement and then we take a measurement on a Monday and we see that the water did actually dry out, that maybe we could add more water to compensate for that over the weekend. But we do have, there's other teachers here that do, they're not called aquariums. What are they called? Not terrariums, not aquariums. The self-sustained systems. I'm drawing a blank here on the mind, but we do have those here.
Aquaponics system?
Aquaponics. That's what I'm trying to think of. Thank you very much. We do aquaponics here. We have an aquaponics tank, and I know we have self-watering devices here. I just never thought of it. So thanks for bringing that up, because that might be something that would be worth it to set up some kind of self-monitoring. And I even thought about, do we want to imitate like rain every once in a while? Like maybe we want to just go ahead and add an extra 5 milliliters to every treatment for every single group. But those are things that I'd work out with the students. We would try different things. So yeah, and thanks, because I don't have the experience doing this yet, so I wouldn't have figured out that maybe 125 milliliters of soil is not enough. So my original plan was to do 500 milliliters of soil with 50 milliliter increments of water, but the egg cartons just seemed like such the perfect thing, because there was 2 different plants for 6 different communities that came out to 12. So that's what gave me the idea of the egg carton. So maybe that's not the best way to do it. But the only way to find out is to try it and see if we fail, to go back and to the drawing board, which is part of the inquiry-based design and engineering design process that we're all trying to do in our classrooms right now. So thanks.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve. It looks like that's all the questions we have for now. Feel free to reach out to me if anything else comes up, and I'd be happy to connect you with Steve if you have any follow-up questions for him. Thank you all so much for joining this evening or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. We're really excited to be launching this webinar series, which is a great opportunity to keep the conversations going with teachers, alumni, and continue sharing different ideas. So thank you so much, Steve, for being the first of the webinar series and this really awesome presentation.
Yeah, and sorry for the technological glitches that I had here, but I got through it, so hopefully not too bad for you guys as well. So thank you very much for those of you that came, and I hope it's useful. I hope to hear about your projects later.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good night.